I'm a lawyer who works to help people who have brain injury and spinal cord injury. And I've been practicing now for over 20 years here in the Sacramento area, but I do cases all over the state and around the nation. And today what I want to do is talk about the different levels of the spine and to try to educate you a little bit about the different levels in which spinal cord injury happens. And so basically what you have here, and here I have a drawing of an outline of a person. And the spine has really three main levels. And the first level is up here, and it basically covers from the base of your skull to the top of your shoulders, and it's a part of your spine called the cervical spine, and that's cervical spine. And below that is the area that's sort of from the shoulder blades or the shoulders down through the mid-back, and that is called the thoracic spine. And that's pretty much from here to here. And then down here in the low back, you have the lumbar spine that takes you all the way. And so those are your three main areas of the spine: the cervical, the thoracic, and the lumbar. Now, oftentimes, I'm sure you've heard of a disc at, C4-5 or L4-5 or L5-6. And so what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about what that really means. So here we are, and all I've done is I've overlaid a piece of paper over the drawing that we just started. And I want you to think for a minute about the cervical spine. Now, the basic spine anatomy has a few different components. There are, if you think about the spine, if you feel along the back of your neck, you'll feel these sort of bony bumps, and those are the backs of the vertebrae, and they're called spinal processes. And for our purposes today, we don't need to get into too much detail about that, but at every level of the spine, we have bone, and what I was just talking about, the spinal process, is like that. And so this side here would be like the front of my neck, and this back here would be like the back of my neck. And we have these bones that go along the spinal column, and each of these is called a vertebrae. Okay? Now, between these vertebrae, this space right here, there's a spongy material called a disc. And so if you hear of something, a herniated disc or a bulging disc, that's talking about this sort of spongy material. It's been described as sort of a jelly donut-like thing, where the outside is a little harder, the inside is a little softer. And what these discs do is they're what allow for motion in the spine. So you have bones that are then able to move because you have these little shock absorbers between each segment of bone. Now, if you think about the cervical spine in the neck, what's up here? Well, this is the head. And you have the brain. And you have the spinal cord that runs down from the brain down the spine, and at each level of the spine there are what are called nerve roots. And so what we have here is the spinal cord, which runs right down the middle of this canal. Okay? And the spinal cord has around it sort of a bag called the dura. And between the spinal cord itself and the dura, this bag is like a sac, and it's filled with CSF, cerebral spinal fluid. Now that fluid, the dura comes up, it goes around the brain and follows the spinal cord. And so your whole spinal cord all the way up around your brain is surrounded by the dura, and inside that dura is the CSF. And that liquid acts really as sort of a shock absorber as well, a protective area for the spinal cord itself. Now from the spinal cord, you get these nerve roots that come out, and what you'll see is these nerve roots, depending on what level there is of the spine that you're talking about, these nerve roots provide information. And so what the spine really is, it's like an information superhighway in your body. If you reach out and touch something with your hand, okay, you feel something with your fingertips, there's information then that is passed through your fingers, through your nervous system to your brain. And then if I go to move my hand, that's because my brain is sending the information back to my hand and my arm. And the way it does that is the brain sends the signal down the spinal cord and out the nerve roots. And if what we're talking about is a signal to the hand, it's going to come out through the neck. And if what we're talking about is, for the most part, a signal to your foot, it's going to come out through the lumbar spine or your low back area. Okay? And so information travels back and forth. Now when we talk about spinal cord injury, I want from an injured disc or vertebrae, I want to show you really a major way that happens. So you remember a moment ago we talked about these discs. Well, one of the things that we know about these discs is in time, as a result of trauma, an accident, someone's in an automobile accident, or they fall. This soft disc material can rupture, and the coating around the outside of the disc can break, and this disc can bulge out into this space. And it can either touch the spinal cord itself, or it can bulge out and it can touch the nerve root. And so what happens when that occurs is it can cause either pain or motor dysfunction. One thing we know about all nerves is that there are two, to really simplify it, maybe oversimplify it, but there are two components to nerves. There's a sensory component, meaning what you feel, and there's a motor component, the ability to move. So when you feel pain, that is pressure, that's something happening to the sensory fibers in the nerve. And when you have weakness or an inability to use your hand or your arm, that's because you have damage or compression or pressure on the motor component to the nerve. And so what happens, we just saw a minute ago this disc that sits between two vertebrae. So let's say C4, C5, that's in the neck, as we learned a minute ago. If you imagine this pen and we're looking at it, that is the view that we have of the neck right now in the vertebrae. But if we were to turn this pen over and we were to take a slice through it and we were to look at the disc, essentially what we would have is we would have these bony structures kind of like this, and then the spinous process out there like that. And the spinal cord sits in there, and the disc material itself sits here. Okay, and then you have these nerve roots that come out like that. Now, what you see with the herniated disc is you'll see pressure, this space here, get filled and put pressure on the spinal cord or one of these nerve roots. And that's what happens when someone has an injured disc, either a bulge or a rupture, anything like that. It puts pressure, causes pain, causes motor dysfunction, numbness, all of those kinds of things. And so if we go back to our original drawing here, okay, each section of the spinal cord relates to the feelings and movement of different parts of your body. And as a general rule, when it comes to the spinal cord, your spinal cord has fibers. Again, you're talking about information that's going along your information superhighway to what's your mainframe computer, your brain. And so you have these fibers that run all the way down, and when you're talking about your feet, we know that there is communication all the way up the spinal cord. When you're talking about your hands and arms, the communication only goes down to about this far. So only to about this far. And most of it comes from the neck, the cervical spine. And one thing we do know about the spine is that for the most part, information that flows from that point of the spinal cord up to the brain. And so your arms, for the most part, are controlled by your cervical spine in your neck. Your torso, a lot in sort of your upper legs get controlled, and some of the arms get controlled by thoracic spine, and your lumbar really has a lot to do with bowel and bladder, down and sexual function, and everything sort of from waist down. Those are the main levels of the spine that control that. So for example, if you have a serious injury to your low back that causes an injury at L4-5, you can have a loss of bowel and bladder function, you can have the inability to walk, you can have a foot drop, all of those kinds of things. And so those are basically the segments of the spine and the way in which the spine works in order to help us live our everyday lives. And that's a basic understanding of how it is that injury to the discs or injury to the spinal cord can cause problems throughout your body. Thanks for joining us.